A torrent of water echoes through a stone tunnel deep beneath a modern city. This is not a modern pipe. It is a 2,500-year-old artery, still pulsing with the lifeblood of Rome. The Cloaca Maxima, the ancient world's greatest sewer, was an engineering feat so advanced its core principles would not be matched for over a millennium. By the end of this journey, you will understand how a civilization that built soaring temples also mastered the darkness beneath their feet to create an infrastructure that shaped an empire. How did Roman engineers conquer the relentless flow of waste and water with such precision? What forgotten secrets still lie hidden in these damp, echoing passages? What does it truly take to build a city that lasts for ages? To grasp its true purpose, we must forget everything we know about modern plumbing. The Cloaca Maxima was not born from a fear of disease or a desire for cleanliness. Its creation was an act of sheer territorial ambition. In the 6th century before Christ, the heart of what would become Rome was not a grand civic center, but a literal swamp. A low-lying, waterlogged valley lay trapped between the Capitoline, Palatine, and Esquiline hills, a stagnant basin fed by natural springs and seasonal floods. This was not a place for a city. It was a barrier. The early kings of Rome, particularly Tarquinius Priscus, looked upon that mire and saw not an obstacle, but an opportunity. Their vision was not to carry away waste, but to carry away the water itself. They commissioned a monumental channel, a titanic ditch lined with stone, to forcibly drain those marshes into the nearby Tiber River. Think of it not as a sewer, but as the world's most ambitious land reclamation project. This was civil engineering on a heroic scale, using sheer manpower and primitive tools to permanently alter the very shape of the land. By channeling the relentless groundwater away, they did something profound. They created stable, dry land from nothing. And on that newly claimed ground, they built the Roman Forum. The political, religious, and commercial heart of the entire empire was founded, quite literally, on a foundation of drained swamp. The Cloaca Maxima was the essential first step, the unseen substructure that made the glorious superstructure above even possible. It was less about managing what came out of the city, and more about creating the city itself. So the greatest sewer began its life not as a necessity of urban life, but as the tool that made urban life possible in that specific location. What does it tell us that Rome's most iconic public space owes its existence to a drainage ditch? But draining a swamp was only the beginning. The true testament to Roman genius lies in how they built the channel itself, transforming a simple ditch into an indestructible underground fortress. They began with the bones of the earth. The primary building material was a volcanic stone called tufa, quarried locally from the hills surrounding Rome. This was no delicate marble. Tufa is a relatively soft, porous rock, easy to cut and shape, yet when layered and compressed, it possesses a surprising, resilient strength. Imagine the laborers, thousands of them, likely slaves and soldiers, hauling these colossal blocks, each weighing hundreds of pounds, into the deepening trench. They fitted them together without mortar in the earliest sections, relying on sheer weight and skillful craftsmanship to create walls that could withstand the constant pressure of earth and water. This was brute force engineering, executed with meticulous care. Yet stone alone was not enough to contain a relentless river of filth and runoff. Water always finds a way. So the Romans deployed their secret weapon, a material so revolutionary it defined their empire. Opus cementitium, Roman concrete. This was not the brittle concrete of later ages. Their recipe was different, and in some ways better. They mixed a volcanic ash called pozzolana, found near the Bay of Naples, with lime and small stones. When combined with water, this mixture created a chemical reaction that produced a paste with almost magical properties. It could set underwater, it bonded ferociously to the tufa blocks, and over time it actually grew stronger. The engineers lined the entire interior of the stone channel with this concrete, creating a seamless, waterproof shell. It was a flexible, self-healing skin that sealed every crack and joint, turning a pile of rocks into a monolithic, impervious tube. This innovation alone allowed the cloaca to endure for centuries where other structures would have crumbled into leaky ruins. And the scale they achieved with these materials defies belief. We are not talking about small, cramped pipes. The main trunk of the Cloaca Maxima, as it approaches the Tiber, is a monumental space. Its arched ceiling soars over 3 meters high, and it is wide enough, according to ancient sources, for a loaded hay wagon to pass through without touching the wall. Think about that for a moment. This was not a hidden, cramped service tunnel. It was a subterranean highway, a cavernous artificial canyon built entirely by hand, deep beneath the bustling city streets. Men could and did walk through it for maintenance. The sheer volume of material moved, the precision of the arched construction, and the enduring strength of the concrete lining speak to an engineering mindset that thought in terms of permanence. They were not building for their generation. They were building for eternity. What kind of confidence, or perhaps arrogance, does it take to invest so much labor and material into something meant to be forever buried and unseen? Building a cavern was one thing, but making it function was an entirely different challenge. The true hydraulic genius of the Cloaca Maxima lies not in its size, but in its silent, almost imperceptible tilt. For the system to work, for the fetid mixture of stormwater and refuse to flow continuously out of the city and into the Tiber River, the entire channel had to maintain a precise, gentle slope from its highest point in the Roman Forum all the way to its mouth at the riverbank. This was a gradient so slight you would never feel it walking the streets above, yet it was the absolute heartbeat of the entire system. Achieving this over a distance of several miles, through a city built on 7 hills, required a level of surveying precision that seems to belong to a much later age. Roman engineers did not have laser levels or satellite guidance. Their tools were deceptively simple. They relied on the chorobates, a long wooden leveling table perhaps 6 meters in length, with a central groove filled with water to establish a true horizontal line. They used the groma, a cross-shaped instrument for sighting right angles, and simple plumb bobs. With these rudimentary tools, teams of surveyors, the agrimensors, would have plotted the course. They worked in short, manageable sections, constantly checking and rechecking their measurements, ensuring that each new segment of the channel began exactly where the last one ended, and more importantly, at exactly the correct lower elevation. A miscalculation of even a few centimeters over a long stretch could be catastrophic. Too steep a slope, and the water would rush through with violent force, eroding the concrete lining and undermining the foundations of buildings above. Too shallow a slope, and the system would stagnate. The waste would settle, clogs would form, and the very purpose of the channel would be defeated. The engineers had to find the golden mean, a gradient just powerful enough to create a self-cleansing flow. They understood, through observation and experience, the principles of hydraulics that would not be formally codified for over 1,000 years. They knew that water, left to its own devices, seeks the path of least resistance. Their job was to build that perfect path and then make it permanent. So as the laborers dug down, they weren't just digging a hole. They were carving a liquid roadway with an exact, predetermined pitch, an invisible downhill track locked into the very bedrock. This meticulous, section-by-section craftsmanship meant that a drop of rainwater falling in the forum would begin a slow, steady, and utterly reliable journey underground, gathering volume from countless other channels and drains, gaining just enough momentum to carry solid matter with it, all the way to the river. It was a perpetual, gravity-powered flushing mechanism. Think of the patience this required. You are an engineer standing in a muddy trench, the sounds of the city distant above you. You have to trust that the man who surveyed the section 500 meters behind you did his job perfectly, and that the man who will build the section 500 meters ahead will do the same. Your entire contribution is a few meters of perfectly angled stone, a single link in a chain you will never see completed. This was engineering as an act of collective faith in mathematics and skill. The silent, relentless flow that resulted was their masterpiece. It was a hidden river, obeying laws the Romans could not fully describe, but had mastered through sheer, determined genius. What does it say about a civilization that they invested such obsessive care into the one part of their city designed to be forgotten? Yet that single titanic channel was not a lonely artery. It was the central trunk of a vast, branching network, a hidden circulatory system that reached into the very fabric of the city. From the main Cloaca Maxima, smaller public sewers, called cloacae, branched off like capillaries. These secondary channels were fed, in turn, by an even finer web of drains from streets, from the monumental public bathhouses, and from the latrines that served the populace. This was not a haphazard collection of pipes. It was a meticulously planned hierarchy, a dendritic system designed to gather flow from every corner of urban life and consolidate it into that one mighty river of discharge. Public latrines, often spacious rooms with long marble benches featuring multiple seats, were directly plumbed into these channels. A constant, shallow stream of fresh water from the aqueducts would flow in a channel at the user's feet, carrying waste away immediately and providing a rudimentary form of flushing. The great imperial bath complexes, like the baths of Caracalla, which consumed staggering volumes of water, were engineered with intricate underfloor hypocaust systems and drains that all ultimately fed into the sewer network. Even the wealthy in their private domus were connected. While the poorest Romans relied on public facilities or chamber pots emptied into street gutters, a well-appointed private home might have its own latrine, often located near the kitchen, with a drain that linked to the public cloaca running beneath the street outside. The street gutters themselves were a critical part of this system. Rainwater washing down the paved roads would sweep up surface debris and animal waste, funneling it into grated openings that dropped directly into the sewers below. This network transformed the entire city into a self-cleaning organism. From the grandest imperial palace to the humblest street gutter, everything was connected to the same silent, downward flow. It was a unified solution, a recognition that waste and water management could not be solved by one monumental project alone. It required an integrated infrastructure, a subterranean mirror of the city above, where every road had its counterpart in a drain, and every public building had its hidden, functional route. This connectivity meant that the Cloaca Maxima was never just carrying away the refuse of a single neighborhood. It was processing the collective metabolic output of over 1 million people. It was the city's lower digestive tract, a necessary and brilliantly engineered counterpart to the aqueducts that were its life-giving arteries. One system brought fresh water in with spectacular, visible grandeur. The other carried the used water out with quiet, invisible efficiency. They were two halves of the same hydraulic cycle, a testament to a civilization that understood a fundamental truth. True grandeur is not just what you build in the light, but what you are willing to construct in the dark. A system of this complexity could not be left to run itself. The relentless flow of water and waste, the constant threat of blockages from debris or collapsed sections, demanded a permanent, organized response. The Romans understood this, and their solution reveals a startlingly modern approach to civic management. They created an official government position, a magistrate of considerable prestige and authority, dedicated solely to the underworld. This was the curator cloacarum, the keeper of the sewers. This was not a job for a lowly sanitation worker. The curator was a high-ranking public official, often a former consul or a man of senatorial rank, appointed directly by the emperor or the senate. Think about the profound statement this makes. The man responsible for the city's bowels held a status equivalent to a governor or a general. It signaled that the health of the hidden infrastructure was as vital to the empire's stability as the command of a legion or the administration of a province. The curator did not get his hands dirty in the tunnels himself, of course. His role was administrative and supervisory. He commanded a permanent staff of architects, engineers, and a small army of laborers and slaves who formed the actual maintenance crews. His responsibilities were vast. He managed the budget for repairs, authorized new connections to the network, settled legal disputes about property lines and drainage rights, and most importantly, ensured the relentless, silent flow never stopped. How did they keep such a vast network clear? Their methods were a blend of brute force and clever engineering. The primary tool was the very lifeblood of the city above, the aqueducts. On a regular schedule, maintenance crews would temporarily divert a surge of fresh water from an aqueduct into a section of the sewer. They would use sluice gates and secondary channels to create a controlled, powerful flush, a miniature tidal wave that would scour the channel clean, sweeping accumulated silt and obstructions toward the Tiber. This was preventive medicine on a colossal scale, using clean water to purge the dirty. But not all problems could be solved from the surface. For the most stubborn blockages, for inspections, and for repairs to the stonework itself, men had to go down into the darkness. Specialized teams, likely slaves or condemned criminals given this perilous duty, would descend through manhole-like access shafts. They worked in conditions we can scarcely fathom. The air was thick with poisonous gases, methane and hydrogen sulfide, which could suffocate a man in minutes or ignite into a sudden, deadly flame. The footing was treacherous, a slick mixture of water, mud, and worse. They carried lamps that burned precious oxygen, and their tools were simple iron hooks and rods for dislodging debris, and baskets for hauling it out. These were the unseen guardians of Rome's grandeur, venturing into a realm of absolute darkness and palpable danger, so that the city above could function in light and order. The very existence of this organized, hierarchical maintenance regime, overseen by a respected official, tells us that the Romans saw their infrastructure not as a static monument, but as a living, breathing system. It required constant, skilled attention. The appointment of a curator cloacarum was a declaration that civilization is not just about what you build, but about what you are willing to sustain, generation after generation, even in the places no one wishes to see. The silent river beneath the streets carried far more than just the city's refuse. Its primary function was hydraulic, but its influence seeped into almost every aspect of Roman life, becoming a multi-purpose tool and a powerful symbol. One of its most critical secondary roles was flood control. The Roman Forum, built on that reclaimed marsh, remained perilously vulnerable to the Tiber's occasional fury. When the river swelled with winter rains, it would back up into the city's low-lying heart. The Cloaca Maxima acted as a pressure valve. Its massive, downward-sloping channel provided a preferential escape route for this floodwater, directing it away from the sacred temples and bustling markets of the Forum, and back into the river's main course. It was a built-in safety feature, a reminder that the engineering which created the space was also perpetually defending it from the very element it had conquered. This practical marvel even found a place in the Roman spiritual world. At a point where the Cloaca passed near the sacred shrine of Venus in the Forum, the Romans worshipped a minor but fascinating deity, Cloacina. She was the goddess of the sewer, the spirit of purification and flow. Her cult was surprisingly old and respected, a recognition that the health of the city and the health of its people were intertwined with the hidden, cleansing current below. To honor Cloacina was to acknowledge that civilization required not just glorious temples, but functional drains. It was a rare moment of divine gratitude for infrastructure, a spiritual stamp on an engineering triumph. And in the shadows of its vaulted passages, the sewer took on a more clandestine character. Its vast, navigable tunnels, known to a select few maintenance crews and officials, presented opportunities for activities far removed from its intended purpose. There are whispers in historical accounts, though hard to verify, of the Cloaca being used as a secret meeting place for political conspiracies, or as an escape route for those needing to move through the city unseen. While likely exaggerated, these stories speak to a powerful truth. The Romans were acutely aware of this second, hidden city beneath their feet. It was a space outside the normal rules of sunlight and society, a realm of echoes and darkness that captured the imagination. It represented the ultimate backdoor, a physical manifestation of the city's subconscious where anything might be possible. So the Cloaca Maxima was never just a pipe. It was a flood defender, a divine charge, and a shadowy alleyway in the collective mind of Rome. This layering of function and meaning transforms it from a simple piece of infrastructure into a deeply Roman artifact. It served the body of the city, its spirit, and its darker intrigues with equal capacity. What does it mean that the same channel that carried away ritual impurities from a temple also, in legend, might have carried a fleeing spy? It means the Romans built with a holistic understanding of urban life, where the practical and the symbolic, the sacred and the secret, could flow together in the same eternal, underground stream. This complexity hints at a final, unsettling question. For all its genius, what was the ultimate cost of this hidden system? What price did the city and its people pay for such elegant, invisible efficiency? The true legacy of the Cloaca Maxima is not written in stone, but in the things it accidentally preserved. For centuries, this relentless underground river acted as a silent archaeologist, collecting and burying the mundane fragments of a million lives. When modern researchers finally ventured into its stagnant side channels and sediment traps, they did not find just sludge. They discovered a time capsule, a uniquely honest snapshot of Roman existence. All because the one rule of a sewer is that anything dropped in is rarely ever retrieved. Coins are among the most common finds. A bronze cestitius slipping through a grate in the Forum, a silver denarius washing down a bathhouse drain. Each one is a frozen moment. The date of the coin tells us when it was lost. Its wear pattern shows how long it was in circulation, passing from hand to hand in the markets above before its final, clinking journey into the dark. These are not hoards buried for safekeeping, but accidental losses, making them a perfect statistical sample of everyday commerce. Jewelry appears too, a gold ring with an intaglio carving, a broken glass bracelet, a simple bronze fibula or brooch that once held a citizen's cloak closed. Each piece speaks of a personal moment of carelessness or misfortune, a small tragedy for its owner that becomes a treasure for history. Then there is the pottery, millions of fragments. Broken amphorae that once carried olive oil from Spain or wine from Greece, courseware cooking pots from a kitchen, fine samyanware tableware from a wealthy domus. The sewers collected it all, grinding it into a sedimentary record of trade, diet, and domestic life across all social classes. But perhaps the most revealing finds are the bones. Not human remains, but the discarded leftovers of countless meals. Archaeologists sifting through the compacted muck find sheep and goat bones, pig vertebrae, chicken bones, and fish scales. The types of cuts, the ages of the animals, and the sheer volume tell a detailed story of the Roman diet, butchering practices, and even seasonal feasting. In one startling discovery, a deposit revealed an astonishing number of whole, tiny songbird skeletons, species like blackbirds and thrushes. This correlates perfectly with texts describing a Roman delicacy, small birds eaten in one bite. The sewer sediment confirmed a culinary fad, turning historical anecdote into proven fact. This refuse channel, designed to make things disappear, instead performed the opposite function. It preserved the ordinary in anaerobic, waterlogged conditions that protected metal from corrosion and organic material from decay. A lost child's toy, a discarded writing stylus, a gaming die, all sank into the soft mud and stayed there, untouched for 2,000 years. These objects were not placed in a tomb for the afterlife. They were not curated in a temple vault. They were simply lost, which makes them profoundly authentic. They represent the unvarnished, unfiltered reality of daily life, from the senator to the slave. Every artifact is a direct connection to a single, anonymous Roman who heard that faint splash or clatter and knew, with a sigh, that the item was gone forever. Their loss is our gain, providing a demographic and economic picture no history book could ever compile. So the greatest sewer, in its final irony, became one of history's most honest archivists. What does it mean that our clearest window into the heartbeat of ancient Rome was found not in its libraries, but in its gutters? That hidden archive of lost objects is still there, waiting beneath the modern streets. The Cloaca Maxima itself has never truly stopped working. Its journey did not end with the fall of the Roman Empire. The great sewer adapted, persisted, and in many ways outlived the civilization that created it. You can still see its ancient mouth today, a dark, solemn arch of tufa stone emerging from the embankment near the Ponte Rotto, the broken bridge, in Rome. It is a quiet, often overlooked monument, stained by centuries of high water, with the brown waters of the Tiber still flowing from its opening. There is no fanfare, no grand plaque, just the original engineering, exposed to the air after 2.5 millennia. It looks less like a celebrated wonder and more like a forgotten cave, which in a way it is. This is the very spot where the silent river of Rome finally met the open world, and it still performs that function today, though in a reduced capacity. While modern Rome is served by a vast, contemporary sewer system, sections of the ancient network, including parts of the main Cloaca Maxima trunk, were integrated into the new infrastructure. They still carry stormwater and runoff, a ghost of their original purpose flowing within a 21st century city. This is not a museum piece behind glass. It is a living, functioning relic, a piece of antique machinery that has never been fully retired. Its endurance is a silent, daily rebuke to the idea that great works must be beautiful to be eternal. The Roman Forum lies in picturesque ruins. The Colosseum is a magnificent shell, but the sewer, the thing they built to be invisible and indestructible, simply kept doing its job. It survived the Gothic invasions, the medieval plundering of Roman stone, the Renaissance, and the birth of the modern Italian state, all while partially buried and largely forgotten. Its resilience is baked into its very design. into that volcanic concrete that grows stronger with time and the overbuilt, monumental scale that allowed it to absorb centuries of neglect. When modern engineers examine it, they express a kind of professional awe. The precision of its gradient, the quality of its waterproofing, the foresight in its capacity, all speak to a standard of civic investment that is humbling. The Cloaca challenges our modern assumptions about infrastructure. We build for decades, perhaps a century. They built for forever. It stands as the ultimate symbol of Roman engineering philosophy, not in its grandeur, but in its stubborn, unyielding persistence. It asks us a difficult question. What have we built that will still be serving a vital function, quietly and without applause, in the year 4000? Yet for all its enduring might, the Roman sewer was not the world's first attempt to manage water and waste. To truly grasp its revolutionary nature, we must step back and see it on a global stage, comparing its ambition to what other great civilizations were building, or failing to build at the same time. Centuries before Rome's founding, the cities of the Indus Valley civilization, like Mohenjo-Daro in modern-day Pakistan, boasted an impressive network of baked brick drains. These channels ran beneath streets and connected to homes, carrying wastewater out to the edges of the settlement. It was a systematic, planned approach, a clear recognition of urban sanitation needs. But there is a crucial difference. The Indus system, while advanced for its time, operated on a much smaller, more local scale. It was a collection of neighborhood drains, not a unified, citywide artery. It lacked the monumental, gravity-fed engineering of a single trunk line like the Cloaca Maxima, and it did not integrate with a vast, fresh water supply network like the Roman aqueducts. It was a brilliant solution for a large town, but not the engine for a metropolis of 1 million souls. Now, fast forward to the world that came after Rome. For centuries following the empire's collapse in Western Europe, the very concept of a public sewer system largely vanished. Medieval London, Paris, and Rome itself reverted to a far cruder reality. Waste was typically managed at the household level, thrown into streets or into cesspits, simple holes dug in the ground near homes. These pits would fill up and then be emptied by hand, a foul and dangerous task, or simply covered over and a new one dug. Streets became open sewers, with rainwater mixing with filth to create rivers of muck. The glorious, integrated vision of the Romans was utterly lost. This regression was not due to a lack of people or wealth, but to a collapse of centralized civic authority and the specialized engineering knowledge required to sustain such complex infrastructure. The Roman model was not just about building a big ditch. It was about maintaining a permanent, managed flow as a public good. The medieval world, fragmented and with different priorities, lacked that unifying vision. So when we place the Cloaca Maxima in this broader timeline, its isolation becomes stunning. For over 1,000 years, from its expansion in the late Republic through the height of the empire and well beyond its fall, it stood without parallel in the Western world in terms of scale, integration, and ambition. Other cultures had drains, but Rome had a hidden, hydraulic circulatory system. It was a leap in thinking, a commitment to collective urban health on a staggering scale that would not be matched until the great public works projects of the 19th century. This comparison forces a striking question. Why did the Romans, of all ancient peoples, make this particular leap? Was it simply a matter of necessity, born from building a city on a swamp? Or was it something deeper in their worldview? A unique blend of practical engineering, imperial arrogance, and a belief that a civilized life required conquering the darkness beneath as thoroughly as the enemies beyond their borders. The answer may lie not in the bricks and mortar, but in the very psychology of the people who walked the streets above. unaware of the eternal river flowing silently beneath their feet. The river of filth flowed directly into the Tiber, just downstream from where the city drew much of its water. This single stark fact shatters any romantic notion of a perfectly hygienic Rome. The Cloaca Maxima was a triumph of waste management, not a miracle of public health in the modern sense. Its primary victory was olfactory and civic, not medical. By channeling the overwhelming bulk of human and animal waste, along with storm runoff, away from the streets and public spaces, it transformed the lived experience of the city. It reduced the staggering stench, the pools of stagnant muck, and the visible filth that plagued other ancient and medieval cities. This alone was a monumental achievement, making Rome a more tolerable, and arguably more dignified, place for its million inhabitants. But the system had a critical, and literally downstream, flaw. The Tiber was not just a receiving basin, it was a source. While the wealthy had water piped directly into their homes from the aqueducts, many poorer Romans still relied on the river for washing, for watering animals, and in some cases, for drinking. The sewer's outfall created a permanent zone of contamination, a breeding ground for waterborne pathogens. The Romans themselves seemed vaguely aware of this paradox. They noticed that people who lived near marshy areas or foul water tended to get sick more often, though they attributed this to bad air or miasma rather than microscopic organisms. So the sewer solved one massive problem by creating another, less visible one. It was a trade-off, moving a health hazard from the crowded city center to its liquid periphery. Where the system's design did consciously promote a form of public health was in its integration with two iconic Roman institutions, the public latrines and the vast bath complexes. The latrines were marvels of social engineering, often large, well-ventilated rooms with long marble benches featuring multiple holes. They were directly connected to the rushing flow of the sewer channels below. A constant stream of fresh aqueduct water ran in a channel at the user's feet, not for washing hands as we do today, but to provide a flushing current that immediately carried waste away. This design minimized odor and stagnation at the point of use, turning a necessary function into a surprisingly social, if not particularly private, civic experience. The baths took this integration even further. These were not just places to get clean. They were monumental leisure centers, consuming astronomical volumes of water. The entire operation, from the hot coldarium to the cold frigidarium, was engineered around constant flow. Used water from the pools and basins drained through cleverly designed channels in the floors, all feeding into the same subterranean network. The baths required the sewer to function, and the sewer's capacity was, in part, designed to accommodate them. This created a cycle of hydraulic luxury, where cleanliness for the masses was facilitated by the same system that carried away their waste. Yet for all this sophistication, the fundamental limitation remained. The system moved the problem, it did not purify it. Epidemics still swept through Rome, and infant mortality was high. The true health benefit was indirect, but profound. By preventing the catastrophic buildup of waste in the city itself, the sewers likely reduced the prevalence of diseases spread by direct contact with human excrement, and the insect populations it attracted. They managed the scale of the problem, making a city of unprecedented size physically possible without immediately succumbing to its own filth. So we must view the Cloaca Maxima not as an ancient precursor to modern sanitation, but as a brilliant, flawed, and monumental first step. It tackled the logistics of waste on a colossal scale, shaped daily habits of cleanliness, and enabled social rituals of bathing, all while pushing the ultimate biological cost downstream and into the future. It was a compromise of staggering engineering, a system that made urban life grander and more bearable, yet never truly safe from the invisible consequences of its own design. This duality forces us to ask, what does it mean for a civilization to be advanced? Is it the ability to hide our waste, or the wisdom to understand its true cost? The final destination for much of that hidden flow was a space that perfectly captures the Roman approach to public life. A place where engineering met society in its most unvarnished form. This was the public latrine, or forica. To understand it, you must first forget every modern notion of privacy and sanitation. Entering a forica was not a solitary retreat. It was often a spacious, well-lit hall, sometimes even adorned with marble statues and decorative frescoes. The centerpiece was a long, continuous stone or marble bench running along the walls, punctuated by a series of round holes, perhaps a dozen or more in a row. There were no partitions, no stalls, no doors. You simply took a seat next to your neighbor, citizen and slave, merchant and soldier, all sharing the same essential function. The engineering brilliance lay directly beneath you. Each hole opened not into a stagnant pit, but into a swift moving channel of fresh water, constantly supplied by the aqueducts. This was the key. A small stream of clean water flowed in a narrow trough just in front of the bench, and another larger channel rushed directly below the seats. The design created a perpetual flush. Waste dropped into that flowing current and was instantly swept away into the main sewer network, minimizing odor and stagnation right at the source. It was a direct, efficient plumbing solution that turned a potential health hazard into a managed, hydraulic event. But the social rituals here were as engineered as the drains. Since toilet paper was unknown, a shared hygiene tool was used. Mounted on a stick near the water channel was a communal sponge, a natural sea sponge. After use, an individual would dip this sponge into the fresh flowing water, clean themselves, rinse the sponge in the channel, and return it to its place for the next person. This practice, so shocking to our modern sensibilities, was simply a practical, communal solution. Some wealthier patrons might bring their own personal sponge, but the system was built on shared resources. Conversation flowed as freely as the water. Business deals were discussed, gossip exchanged, and political opinions debated across the open bench. The forica was a social hub, a great equalizer where the body's needs stripped away pretense, all made possible by the silent, reliable engineering below. This space embodies a profound Roman contradiction. They invested incredible sophistication to manage filth, yet their solution remained intensely, unavoidably public. The running water was a marvel, but the shared sponge a vector for disease they could not comprehend. It was a triumph of civic infrastructure that served a communal culture, yet it laid bare the stark realities of a world without germ theory. The forica was not just a bathroom. It was a theater of daily life, proving that even the most mundane human act could be shaped by grand engineering and social ambition. What does it say that they built monuments to collective existence in the one place we now insist on absolute solitude? The public latrine's cleansing stream was not magic, but a delivery from a distant mountain. That fresh water flowing at your feet in the forica, and the powerful surge that periodically scoured the main sewer channels, began its journey miles away, high in the Apennine Ranges. To understand the sewer is to understand its inseparable twin, the aqueduct. These were not two separate systems, but the two halves of a single, breathtakingly ambitious hydraulic cycle, the defining hallmark of Roman urban genius. One brought life in, the other carried life's residue out, and the entire city thrived in the balance between them. The aqueducts were monumental exercises in gravitational persuasion. Roman engineers would locate a pure spring or a clear mountain stream, often dozens of miles from the city. Then, through a combination of gentle underground channels, soaring arcaded bridges across valleys, and tunnels bored straight through hills, they would guide that water down an imperceptible, unwavering slope, using nothing but gravity, all the way to Rome. The precision required was staggering. The gradient of an aqueduct channel was often even shallower than the sewers, sometimes dropping only a few centimeters over a kilometer, just enough to maintain a steady, gentle flow without erosion. This was water brought on a slow, deliberate pilgrimage to the heart of the empire. By the imperial peak, 11 major aqueducts fed Rome, delivering over 1 million cubic meters of water every single day. This was not just for drinking. It was the city's hydraulic fuel. This constant pressurized influx of clean water is what made the sewer's design not just possible, but brilliantly effective. The latrines needed that steady stream in the front channel to be usable. More importantly, the entire sewer network relied on this superabundance for its maintenance. Remember the curator Cloaca and his teams. Their most powerful tool was not a hook or a shovel, but a temporary diversion of aqueduct water. They would use sluice gates to periodically route a controlled torrent from an aqueduct directly into a section of the Cloaca. This engineered flash flood would blast through the channel, scouring away accumulated silt, sand, and debris, flushing it all down toward the Tiber. It was a preventive cleaning on a colossal scale, using the empire's most precious resource, fresh water, to cleanse its least precious one. This integration reveals a profound systems thinking mindset. The Romans did not see water use as a linear path, but as a cycle with multiple purposes. Water would arrive pristine at a monumental public fountain, the terminus of an aqueduct. Citizens would collect it for drinking and cooking. The overflow from that fountain would then feed the channel in a public bathhouse. After being used for bathing, that now grey water would drain into the sewer system, adding volume to its flow. Finally, a separate dedicated aqueduct branch might be tapped for that final, cleansing surge to purge the sewer itself. A single molecule of water might thus serve public display, personal hygiene, waste transport, and infrastructure maintenance in one long, gravity-powered journey from mountain to river. This was the ultimate in efficiency and foresight. The aqueducts allowed the city to live with water in abundance, which in turn allowed the sewers to function not as stagnant pits, but as flowing rivers. The two systems were engineered in concert, a master plan that considered input and output as one interconnected problem. The soaring, graceful arches of the aqueducts are the celebrated symbol of this achievement. But their true partner, the dark, inverted arch of the sewer, is what completed the circuit. One cannot exist without the other in a city of 1 million people. The glorious abundance above guaranteed the necessary flow below. What does it say about a civilization that it built its most beautiful monuments to serve its most utilitarian needs, and its most utilitarian structures with the care of a monument? This symbiotic relationship between the pure and the foul, the visible and the buried, is the unseen engine that made Rome's unprecedented scale and splendor physically possible. That shadowy realm beneath the streets did not belong solely to engineers and maintenance crews. It also belonged to the monsters of the mind. For centuries after Rome's fall, as knowledge of the great sewer's true purpose faded into legend, the Cloaca Maxima and its tributaries became fertile ground for a darker, wilder kind of story. These were not tales of civic pride, but of primordial fear. The dank, echoing tunnels, smelling of earth and decay, seemed less like a human construction and more like a natural cavern, a gateway to the classical underworld itself. In the public imagination, This was a place where anything lost might be found, and where things never meant to be seen might emerge. The most persistent and chilling legend to coil its way out of the depths was that of the Roman sewer crocodile. By the 16th century, Renaissance scholars and diarists recorded a bizarre and recurring rumor. They spoke of a monstrous reptile, a crocodile or a great serpent, that lived deep within the labyrinthine sewers. It was said to have been brought to Rome centuries earlier as an exotic pet for an emperor, perhaps as part of a private menagerie. The story goes that the creature escaped or was released, and it found its way into the vast network of channels, where it thrived in the darkness, feeding on rats and sewage, growing to an enormous size over generations. Sightings were always second-hand, a friend of a friend who glimpsed something scaly and swift in the murky water. But the tale took firm root. It spoke to a deep-seated anxiety about what the city had buried, and what might be waiting down there, grown fat on the city's refuse. The sewer crocodile was a perfect metaphor, a literal monster created from the empire's forgotten luxuries and its hidden filth. It was a story that transformed an engineering marvel into a living, breathing dungeon. This folklore reveals how the physical reality of the sewers shaped cultural perception. When you have a confirmed, tangible space that is vast, dark, unexplored, and carries a palpable sense of danger from its foul air and sudden floods, it ceases to be just a pipe. It becomes a frontier. It becomes the modern world's closest equivalent to a mythological underworld, a place where the rules of the surface did not apply. These tunnels were a direct physical link to the Roman past, but also to all the ancient stories of journeys into Hades. To descend into the Cloaca was, in a very real sense, to walk into the belly of history itself, a place of ghosts, lost treasures, and chimeric beasts. The legends served a purpose. They enforced a social boundary, keeping the curious and the unwary out of a genuinely perilous environment through the power of story. But they also fulfilled a deeper, more poetic need. Every great city has its visible glory, its temples and towers. The sewer legends gave the city a corresponding invisible mythology, a shadow legend to match its light. They acknowledged that for all its marble and lore, Rome was built upon a foundation of profound and echoing darkness. What does it say about us that we need to populate our deepest, darkest spaces not just with rats and water, but with dragons? Even the greatest engineering has its breaking point. For all its brilliance, the Cloaca Maxima was not an all-powerful solution. It was a system built for a specific scale and a predictable enemy, and over centuries, both the city and the river conspired to overwhelm it. The most dramatic failures were written in floodwaters. Events so catastrophic they were recorded by historians as divine omens or imperial failures. The Roman Forum, built on that reclaimed marsh, remained the most vulnerable point. When the Tiber swelled with exceptional winter rains or spring snowmelt from the distant mountains, it would rise with terrifying speed. The river's surface could climb higher than the sewer's outfall arch. When that happened, the hydraulic miracle reversed itself. Instead of an escape valve, the Cloaca's channel became a conduit for invasion. The pressurized river water would force its way upstream through the sewer. Pushing against the gentle gradient the engineers had so carefully crafted. It would back up through the network, seeking every smaller drain and outlet. And then the Forum would flood. Historical records describe scenes of chaos. Marble statues submerged to their knees, the sacred temples of Saturn and Vesta standing in lakes, the bustling market stalls floating away on a tide of brown, sewage-tainted water. One particularly devastating flood in the 2nd century, after Christ, was said to have lasted for an entire week, drowning livestock and trapping citizens in their upper stories. Each of these events was a humbling reminder. The engineering that had created the dry land could be undone in a day by the very force it was meant to control. The system had a fatal flaw. It could only push water out if the river was low enough to receive it. When the river rose, the cloaca became its servant, not its master. The floods exposed a deeper, more insidious challenge than any single storm. The city above the sewer was not a static entity. Over centuries, Rome grew denser, taller, and more complex. The original calculations for the cloaca's capacity were made for a republic, not an empire of 1 million souls. Every new insula or apartment block, built over a previously open area, replaced permeable ground with impermeable stone. Rainwater that once would have soaked into the earth now raced across rooftops and paved streets, funneling faster and in greater volume into the gutters and drains. The population boom meant more waste, more bathhouses, more demand on the entire hydraulic cycle. The system was being asked to handle a load its creators never envisioned. Furthermore, the physical structure of the city itself began to work against the underground network. As grand new buildings were constructed, their foundations sometimes encroached on or even damaged the older sewer tunnels. Illegal connections from private homes could narrow a channel. The relentless accumulation of silt and debris, if not scoured out with perfect regularity by the maintenance crews, would slowly reduce the channel's diameter, like arteries hardening with age. A reduction of even a few centimeters across miles of tunnel could drastically cut the flow rate, making blockages more likely and reducing the system's ability to handle a sudden downpour. Maintaining this equilibrium became a never-ending battle for the curator Cloaca and his teams. They were not just fixing breaks. They were constantly recalibrating a living system against the pressures of a changing world. Their task was a race between human expansion and hydraulic physics. They would have to clear illegal dumpings of construction rubble, repair sections where the weight of a new palace above had caused a ceiling to crack, and constantly monitor the aqueduct diversions to ensure the cleansing flushes were powerful enough. It was a testament to the original over-engineering that the system functioned as well as it did for as long as it did. But the famous floods tell us that sometimes the river and the city's own growth won. These were moments when the hidden infrastructure announced its limits with violent clarity, pouring the city's own forgotten contents back into its most sacred spaces. The floods were more than disasters. They were brutal audits of Roman engineering, revealing that even eternity has its conditions. If the system could be overwhelmed by the world it made possible, what does that tell us about the true nature of progress? Is it a straight line of improvement, or a constant, fragile negotiation with the forces we try to command? Darkness and silence reclaimed the tunnels. With the slow collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, the world above the Cloaca Maxima changed irrevocably. The centralized state that had funded the curator and his maintenance crews dissolved into fractured kingdoms. The aqueducts, the life-giving partners of the sewer, were cut by invaders or fell into disrepair, their precious flow of fresh water reduced to a trickle. Without that constant influx, the hydraulic cycle broke. The great flushing surges that had scoured the channels ceased. The public latrines, dependent on running water, became unusable and were abandoned. The monumental sewer system, deprived of its purpose and its maintenance, did not vanish, but it entered a long, strange twilight. Its function was forgotten, but its physical presence remained, a buried ghost haunting the city it once served. For the people of medieval Rome, living among the towering ruins of a civilization they could no longer comprehend, the cloaca became something else entirely. Its occasional access points, stone shafts leading down into echoing blackness, were no longer entrances to a civic utility. They were perceived as gateways to the underworld, feared passages into realms of demons and lost spirits. The few who dared to venture down returned with tales of a vast, labyrinthine darkness, a subterranean world of stale air and crumbling brick. The brilliant engineering that had created a flowing river was now interpreted as the work of giants or sorcerers from a lost age. The sewer's original name and purpose faded into obscurity, replaced by superstition. It became, in the medieval mind, a forbidden place, a physical manifestation of the city's decay and forgotten sins. The practical knowledge of gradient, concrete, and water flow was utterly lost, buried as deeply as the tunnels themselves. The city above adapted to a much cruder reality. Waste was managed locally, thrown into streets or collected in cesspits, a regression to a pre-Roman standard that would last for centuries. The glorious, integrated vision of urban management had been replaced by a patchwork of survival, and the monumental infrastructure beneath their feet was remembered only in fearful legend. Then, 1,000 years after its peak, a new light began to flicker in the darkness. The Renaissance, with its fervent rediscovery of classical texts, and its obsession with the visible glory of ancient Rome, turned its curious gaze downward. Scholars, artists, and early antiquarians, armed with a new respect for Roman achievement, started to investigate these mysterious subterranean passages not as hell mouths, but as artifacts. In the 15th and 16th centuries, intrepid figures began to organize expeditions. They would lower themselves on ropes, carrying torches that pushed back the gloom of a millennium. What they found left them awestruck. They were not exploring natural caves, but clearly man-made vaults of staggering scale and precision. They marveled at the sheer size of the tunnels, at the enduring strength of the Roman concrete that still sealed the walls, at the elegant, relentless downward slope of the floors. For the first time since antiquity, humans stood in the Cloaca Maxima and understood they were in a work of engineering, not a lair of monsters. Renaissance artists like Leonardo da Vinci, who was fascinated by hydraulics and anatomy, studied the principles of these ancient waterways. The rediscovery was a profound shock to the contemporary sense of progress. Here were men who considered themselves at the peak of human knowledge, yet they were standing in a sewer built 1,500 years earlier that was, in many ways, superior to anything in their own cities. The cloaca forced them to confront the uncomfortable truth that a vital branch of technical knowledge had not advanced, but had catastrophically regressed. The tunnels were sketched, measured, and described with a mixture of professional envy and deep reverence. They were proof that the ancients had possessed secrets modern man had yet to relearn. This underground wonder became a must-see stop on the Grand Tour for wealthy European travelers in the 17th and 18th centuries. Adventurous souls would pay guides to take them on a boat ride, floating through the subterranean arches by lantern light, a macabre and thrilling tourist attraction. They were not there to study sanitation, but to experience the sublime, to feel the awe and terror of a man-made abyss, to touch the stones of a lost world. The Cloaca Maxima had completed a full, strange cycle. From a practical tool of empire to a feared pit of superstition, to a rediscovered marvel that humbled the modern age. Its legacy in these centuries is a story not of continuous use, but of the fragility of knowledge itself. It asks us a haunting question. What other foundational pillars of our own civilization might we forget, allowing them to fade into myth, waiting for a future age to stumble upon them and wonder at our lost genius? That rediscovered marvel did more than just awe tourists. It planted a seed. For the engineers of the 19th century, grappling with cities drowning in their own filth, the Cloaca Maxima was not a curiosity. It was a blueprint. The direct line from Rome's subterranean river to the sewers beneath our feet today is startlingly clear. A story of forgotten principles, painfully relearned. The catalyst was not progress, but plague. By the mid-1800s, London was a city in crisis, its population having exploded during the Industrial Revolution. Waste management had not advanced beyond the medieval model, relying on overflowing cesspits and open drains that fed directly into the Thames. The river, the city's main source of drinking water, had become a toxic, slow-moving sewer. The result was the Great Stink of 1858, a summer so hot the polluted Thames literally vaporized, choking the city with a smell so potent it halted Parliament. But the stench was merely a symptom. The real killer was cholera, a waterborne disease that swept through the crowded slums in repeated, devastating waves, killing tens of thousands. Medical science of the time was divided, many still clinging to the ancient Roman idea of miasma, that disease was spread by bad air, but a growing number of physicians and reformers pointed to the contaminated water. They argued correctly that the city was poisoning itself. The crisis demanded a hero not of medicine, but of civil engineering. That man was Joseph Bazalgette. Appointed as the chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, Bazalgette faced a problem of Roman proportions: how to permanently divert a river of waste away from a metropolis of millions. He proposed a radical, staggeringly expensive solution, an entirely new, integrated sewer system for London. And when he designed it, he looked back. Bazalgette was a student of history and engineering. He knew of the Cloaca Maxima, its scale, its reliance on gravity, and its use of intercepting channels to consolidate flow. His masterstroke was a plan that mirrored the Roman logic, but on a far grander technological scale. He designed a system of 82 miles of large, brick-lined intercepting sewers that would run parallel to the Thames, buried deep beneath the city's embankments. Just like the Roman network, these were not small pipes. They were monumental tunnels, large enough for a man to walk through. Their purpose was identical: to gather the filth from thousands of smaller street sewers and carry it by gravity far downstream, away from the populated center, where it could be pumped out and later treated. The Roman principle of the self-cleansing gradient was absolutely central. Bazalgette's team of surveyors painstakingly mapped London's topography, ensuring every inch of his system had just enough slope to maintain a constant, scouring flow, preventing stagnation and blockages. He even employed a similar strategy of using abundant water, though in his case, it was the sheer volume of London's rainfall and waste, channeled efficiently, that kept the system clean. The materials were modern brick and Portland cement, but the underlying philosophy was 2,000 years old: large-scale, gravity-fed infrastructure built for permanence and public health. When Bazalgette's system was completed in the 1870s, the results were transformative. Cholera outbreaks in London virtually ceased. The Thames began to recover. The city's death rate plummeted. Bazalgette had achieved what the Romans did. He made urban life on an unprecedented scale not just possible, but sustainable. He proved that the solution to modern, industrial squalor was, ironically, an ancient one: a commitment to monumental public works that served the collective good. His sewers, like the Cloaca before them, were built over the objections of short-sighted critics worried about cost, and they stand today as the unseen foundation of modern London. This lineage is profound. The 19th century public health movement, armed with new germ theory, provided the scientific why. But the engineering how, the very concept of a citywide, intercepting sewer system, came from looking into the past. Engineers in Paris, Hamburg, and Chicago followed similar models, each creating their own versions of a subterranean river. The Cloaca Maxima was the original proof of concept. a demonstration that a civilization could, through will and engineering, control its own biological waste. The Victorians did not copy the Roman stone for stone. They adapted the core principles to a new world of steam pumps, concrete, and epidemiology. But the debt is undeniable. It shows that true innovation is sometimes not invention, but remembrance, the rediscovery of a fundamental truth buried by time. What the Romans knew instinctively, and the 19th century learned through catastrophe, is that a city's greatness is measured not by the height of its spires, but by the depth of its foresight. The echoes of Basil Jett's work are now met with the silent hum of lasers. While the Victorian engineer could only map what he could see and measure, today's archaeologists wield tools that would seem like sorcery to both him and the Romans. They are not just exploring the Cloaca Maxima, they are digitally resurrecting it, layer by ancient layer, to ask questions that were once impossible. The key is a technology called LiDAR, or light detection and ranging. Archaeologists mount precise laser scanners on tripods deep within the accessible sections of the sewer. The device spins, firing millions of laser points per second at the surrounding walls, ceiling, and floor. Each point measures distance with millimeter accuracy, building a colossal point cloud, a digital ghost of the physical space. This creates a perfect, immutable three-dimensional record of the sewer's current state, capturing every crack, every tool mark on a stone, every subtle variation in the concrete lining. But the magic does not stop there. The same technology is used from above. Specially equipped drones are flown down accessible shafts or through larger tunnels. Their scanners' mapping stretches too dangerous or too cramped for a human team. This allows for the comprehensive mapping of entire branches, without a single person needing to wade through the hazardous muck. Once these billions of data points are gathered, software stitches them together into a breathtakingly detailed virtual model. An archaeologist can now put on a virtual reality headset and stand inside a perfect digital replica of the Cloaca Maxima. They can walk its entire length from the Forum to the Tiber in minutes, examining the stonework from angles that are physically unreachable. They can take precise measurements of the channel's width and height at any point, calculating the exact gradient with a level of precision the original agrimensors could only dream of. This digital twin becomes a laboratory for new discoveries. By analyzing the model, researchers can identify different construction phases. They might see where a section of tufa block wall from the Republican era meets a later imperial concrete repair, revealing a history of maintenance and adaptation written in the stone itself. They can simulate water flow through the channel, testing theories about its capacity. By inputting different volumes of water, they can see exactly where eddies would form, where silt would naturally deposit, and how fast a surge from an aqueduct diversion would need to be to effectively scour a given section. This moves understanding from speculation to simulation. Perhaps most intriguingly, this technology allows them to see the sewer not as an isolated tube, but in context. By combining the subterranean scan data with scans of the city above and ground-penetrating radar, they can create a complete cross-section of ancient Rome. They can see exactly how deep the sewer runs beneath the foundation of a particular temple, or how it curves to avoid the roots of a long-vanished building. This reveals the priorities and constraints of the urban planners. Did the sewer dictate the street plan, or did the growing city force the sewer to take awkward detours? The digital model can answer that. These virtual reconstructions are more than just high-tech maps. They are preservation tools. The scans provide a permanent record of the structure's condition, allowing conservators to monitor erosion or cracking over time. They also offer a way to share this inaccessible wonder with the world. Museums can create immersive experiences where visitors virtually navigate the tunnels, fostering a public connection to this hidden monument. The laser light, scanning the darkness where torches once flickered, is revealing a truth more profound than any legend. It shows us that the Cloaca Maxima was not a static, finished masterpiece, but a living, evolving organ of the city, constantly modified and repaired across centuries. Each scan is a pixel in a new portrait of Roman engineering, one painted not with brushstrokes, but with mathematics and light, allowing us to see, for the first time, the full anatomy of the empire's hidden heartbeat. What other secrets might these silent lasers pull from the darkness? Secrets even the Romans themselves forgot. Beneath the marble veneer of public latrines and bathhouses lay a stark, unspoken truth. The glorious hydraulic network, for all its engineering brilliance, followed the same contours as Roman society itself. It flowed most freely where power and wealth resided. The monumental public spaces, the imperial palaces on the Palatine Hill, and the grand villas of the wealthy were all meticulously integrated into the system. Their waste was whisked away silently and efficiently, contributing to the clean, odor-free ideal of civilized life they enjoyed. The aqueduct-fed latrines and the vast baths were civic trophies, but their benefits were geographically exclusive. They clustered in the city's political and commercial heart, the low-lying areas between the original 7 hills that had been drained by the Cloaca Maxima itself. This was the Rome of senators, merchants, and citizens who could afford leisure. But Rome was a city of extremes. Beyond the Forum and the affluent slopes, sprawling across the flat plains outside the old Servian wall, were the Subura, the crowded, chaotic districts where the vast majority of the population lived. Here, in the labyrinthine streets of multi-story apartment blocks called insulae, the reality of sanitation was profoundly different. These neighborhoods, built on cheaper land often prone to flooding, were largely disconnected from the grand subterranean river. The sophisticated network of stone drains simply did not extend to these outskirts in any comprehensive way. For the shopkeeper, the laborer, the freedman, and the slave, waste management was a private, precarious affair. They relied on chamber pots emptied into open street gutters or, at best, communal cesspits dug in cramped courtyards. These pits were simple holes in the ground, lined with porous pottery jars, or sometimes just left as earth. They would fill up with a foul mixture of human waste and household rubbish, then be covered over and a new one dug, slowly poisoning the local groundwater. The stench in these districts would have been constant, and the risk of disease from contaminated wells was a daily fact of life. This created a brutal sanitation divide, a literal hierarchy of cleanliness. The wealthy on the hills lived in a world engineered to remove filth. The poor in the low-lying outskirts lived in a world where filth accumulated. When it rained, the stormwater rushing down from the paved hills would sweep through these outer districts, turning streets into rivers of mud and refuse, a far cry from the efficient, channeled flow beneath the city center. The social inequality was engineered into the very bedrock. The Cloaca Maxima was a solution born from the need to create the Forum and serve the elite's vision of urban order. Its expansion was always a strategic choice, following money and political necessity, not public health for all. The system did not exist to serve the million, but to enable the city that housed a million, primarily for the benefit of the few 100,000 who mattered most. So the next time you picture the elegant flow of water in a Roman latrine, remember the silent majority for whom that sound was replaced by the splash of a chamber pot into an open ditch. The true cost of Roman grandeur was often born in the neighborhoods no aqueduct ever reached. That silent river of discharge had to go somewhere, the Tiber, the life-giving artery that first drew settlers to its banks. became the ultimate recipient of Rome's engineered cleanliness. Every day, the Cloaca Maxima poured a concentrated torrent of the city's metabolic output directly into its waters, a few miles downstream from where many citizens still drew water for washing, cooking, and even drinking. This was the system's great, unresolved paradox. In solving the problem of filth in the streets, the Romans created a profound, and likely deadly, problem of filth in their primary water source. We must picture the river not as the serene, blue ribbon of romantic art, but as a sluggish, brown flow, carrying within it the suspended evidence of a million lives. The waste from public latrines, the runoff from slaughterhouses and tanneries, the chemical residues from fullers using urine to bleach cloth, the spilled oils and food scraps from countless kitchens, all converged into that single mighty conduit and surged out into the open river. The immediate area around the sewer's outfall, near the Forum Boarium, the cattle market, would have been a zone of palpable contamination. The water here was likely murky and foul-smelling, with visible debris floating on the surface. The riverbed would have accumulated a thick, organic sludge, a sediment of history composed of everything that did not wash out to sea. This constant discharge had a catastrophic effect on aquatic life. The process we now call eutrophication would have been starkly evident. The massive influx of organic matter and nutrients acted as a fertilizer for algae and bacteria. These microorganisms would bloom in explosive numbers, consuming the waste, and in the process, consuming the dissolved oxygen in the water. This created dead zones, stretches of the river where oxygen levels dropped so low that fish and other aquatic creatures could not survive. The Tiber, for miles downstream from Rome, may have been largely lifeless, a biological desert created by the city's abundance. For the human population, the consequences were insidious and widespread. While the wealthy elite enjoyed piped water from the clean, distant aqueduct springs, the urban poor and many in the middle classes still relied on the Tiber or on shallow, riverside wells for their daily needs. These wells were easily contaminated by seepage from the polluted river and from the countless cesspits in the overcrowded neighborhoods. The Romans had no understanding of germ theory. They observed that people who lived near marshes or foul water got sick, but they blamed bad air, miasma. They did not connect the invisible contents of the water they drank to the violent cramps, dehydration, and death of diseases like dysentery, typhoid, and especially cholera. Major outbreaks of what they called pestilence were a recurring feature of Roman life, often spiking in the hot summer months when river levels were low and the concentration of pathogens was at its highest. The engineering triumph that made the city bearable likely also made it a periodic death trap for its most vulnerable inhabitants. This presents us with a critical balance sheet, the true environmental and health trade-off of Roman engineering. On one side, the ledger shows an immense benefit. By removing vast quantities of waste from the urban environment, the sewers drastically reduced direct contact with human excrement. They controlled vermin populations associated with waste piles and eliminated the overwhelming stench that plagued other ancient cities. This almost certainly reduced the incidence of diseases spread by direct contact and insects, like certain parasites and typhus. It made Rome a more livable, more civilized space on a scale never before achieved. On the other side of the ledger is the concentrated, downstream poison. The system took a diffuse problem, waste scattered across a vast city, and consolidated it into a powerful, point source pollutant. It traded 1,000 small threats for one enormous, flowing one. The Romans optimized for the sensory and civic experience of the city center, pushing the biological cost downstream and onto those without access to clean aqueduct water. This was not a failure of engineering. but a failure of holistic understanding. They mastered the physics of flow and the chemistry of concrete, but the ecology of the river and the microbiology of disease were mysteries far beyond their comprehension. Their solution was brilliant for its immediate, visible goal, creating a clean and orderly urban space. Yet it was tragically blind to its own longer-term, invisible consequences. The Tiber paid the price for Rome's grandeur, becoming the empire's unconscious sacrifice zone. What does this tell us about progress itself? That every solution, no matter how ingenious, creates a new set of problems in a different place, or for a different people. The Roman sewer stands as a monument, not to perfect wisdom, but to the eternal human challenge of managing the unintended consequences of our own cleverness. The silent, enduring stonework of the Cloaca Maxima holds no inscriptions of its creators. The names of the men who carved this underworld are lost, buried deeper than the sewer itself. Yet the sheer, staggering scale of the project demands we ask, whose hands actually built eternity? The labor force was almost certainly a brutal mosaic of the empire's most expendable and most talented people. At the lowest, most numerous level were the bodies, the human engines of brute force. This work was the province of slaves, vast populations captured in Rome's endless wars of expansion. Prisoners from Gaul, from Carthage, from Greece, and from the eastern frontiers would have found themselves marched not to plantations, but into the deepening trenches of Rome. Alongside them labored convicted criminals, for whom a death sentence was commuted to a slower death underground. Theirs was the muscle work, the crushing toil of digging the initial trenches through heavy clay and stubborn bedrock, of hauling the massive tufa blocks on wooden sledges, of mixing and carrying the endless streams of mortar and concrete. They worked in chains, under the watchful eyes of foremen and the lash of overseers. The conditions during construction were a special kind of hell, confined and lethal. Before the vaulted ceiling was sealed, they stood in a deep, muddy canyon, the walls rising around them, cutting off light and air. In the summer, the trench became a stifling oven, trapping heat and humidity. In the winter, it was a cold, waterlogged pit. The risk of a collapsing trench wall was constant, a silent threat that could bury a work crew in an instant. And then there was the water itself, the very element they were trying to conquer. As they dug down toward the water table, the trench would begin to fill, requiring constant bailing, even as they tried to lay foundations. They worked in a perpetual slurry of mud, their feet swollen and raw, their lungs breathing air thick with damp and decay. Above this army of forced labor stood the architects of this misery, the skilled Roman engineers and overseers. These were often military men, veterans of the legions who had built forts, roads, and siege works across the empire. They understood logistics, discipline, and geometry. Their job was to translate the grand vision into inches and angles on the ground. They would have directed the precise placement of every stone, supervised the mixing of the concrete to the exact consistency, and constantly checked the gradient with their simple, vital levels. For them, the sewer was a complex puzzle of physics and manpower, a problem to be solved with ruthless efficiency. They likely saw the slaves and prisoners not as people, but as units of labor, interchangeable and replaceable. The most dangerous work of all came as the project neared completion. When the great vaulted ceiling was being closed, workers would have erected massive wooden frameworks to support the arch as the final keystones were set. They labored in near total darkness, the only light coming from flickering oil lamps that consumed the thin oxygen and risked igniting pockets of foul gas. The weight of the stone above them was palpable, a constant groaning pressure. If the wooden framework shifted or a stone was miscut, the entire arch could collapse, crushing everyone beneath it. And once the ceiling was sealed, the true nature of the environment set in. The air grew still and thick with the smell of wet earth and the methane already seeping from the soil, a gas that could suffocate without warning or explode from a single spark. For the maintenance crews who followed, this would be a permanent condition. But for the builders, it was the final phase of a sentence many did not survive. The Cloaca Maxima stands as a monument to two kinds of Roman genius: the brilliance of its engineering and the brutality of its labor system. It is a creation born from equal parts calculation and cruelty, from the mind of the engineer and the broken back of the slave. One group designed for eternity, the other was sacrificed to the immediate, crushing demand of its creation. This hidden world was not just a triumph over nature, but a stark reflection of the society that built it, where human life was often the cheapest and most readily available material. What does it mean that the foundation of Roman public health was laid in a private hell? That underworld of suffering was rarely mentioned by the poets who sang of Rome's marble glory. Yet the Cloaca Maxima, for all its physical concealment, could not escape the cultural imagination. Its presence seeped into art and literature, its meaning shifting with the centuries from a proud civic achievement to a profound symbol of decay. The earliest references come from the Romans themselves, and they are strikingly matter of fact. Pliny the Elder, that voracious collector of knowledge in the 1st century, did not describe the sewer with horror or awe, but with a technician's admiration. In his natural history, he lists it among Rome's most magnificent achievements, ranking it alongside the aqueducts and paved highways. For Pliny, it was simply proof of human triumph over nature, a necessary component of a grand and ordered world. He notes its construction under the Tarquin kings and marvels at its endurance, a testament to engineering that served the public good. There is no romanticism here, only the pride of a civilization that saw the management of water and waste as a fundamental pillar of its identity. Other Roman writers, like Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus, mention it briefly in their histories, always in the context of the great public works that defined the city's growth. To them it was infrastructure, worthy of note but not of deep literary reflection. It was as much a part of Rome as the Senate or the legions, a silent partner in the project of empire. This practical view vanished with Rome's fall. For over 1,000 years, the great sewer was forgotten by all but the fearful, its name surviving only in fragmented manuscripts. Then, in the Renaissance, it was rediscovered not just by engineers, but by artists and thinkers drunk on the rediscovery of antiquity. The cloaca began to appear in art, but not as a sewer. Renaissance artists, seeking to visualize the legendary origins of Rome, depicted the Cloaca Maxima in a startling new light. In elaborate engravings and paintings of the ancient city, they showed it not as a hidden drain, but as a glorious open-air canal. They pictured it flowing clearly through the Forum, lined with elegant stone banks, with citizens strolling beside it as if it were a Venetian waterway. This was a beautiful misunderstanding. Having read the classical texts that praised its magnificence, and seeing the massive scale of its ruins, they could not conceive that such a monumental structure was meant to be buried and foul. They sanitized it, both literally and figuratively, transforming an engineering marvel into a picturesque ornament. This reflected the Renaissance idealization of Rome, a desire to see the past as a clean, heroic, and aesthetically perfect world. The messy, functional reality was airbrushed away in favor of a symbol of lost, pastoral order. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the symbol inverted completely. As the Romantic movement took hold, with its fascination for ruins, decay, and the sublime power of nature, the Cloaca Maxima found a new role. It became the ultimate metaphor for urban corruption and the inevitable collapse of empires. Writers and poets now saw it not as a triumph, but as a dark, digestive organ, consuming the city's grandeur and excreting its decay. The sewer became a literary shortcut for the hidden sins of society, the place where everything repressed eventually flows. In modern media, this symbolic weight has only grown heavier. It appears in films and novels not as a marvel, but as a labyrinthine setting for danger and revelation. It is the lair of monsters in horror stories, the escape route for protagonists in thrillers, and the hiding place for secrets in historical dramas. It represents the subconscious of the city itself, where truths too ugly for the sunlight are preserved in the muck. From Pliny's civic pride to the Renaissance's picturesque era, to the modern metaphor of decay, the Cloaca's journey through culture tells its own story. It reflects our changing relationship with the ancient world, shifting from admiration to nostalgia, and finally to a darker recognition that even the greatest civilizations are built upon foundations, both brilliant and deeply flawed. The stones have not changed, but the stories we tell about them reveal more about our own fears and fascinations than they do about Roman concrete. What we choose to see in that darkness is a mirror held up to our own time. The darkness of the Cloaca Maxima has not yet given up all its secrets. For all our lasers and maps, we have likely only charted the main arteries of a system that once branched like a subterranean tree. The full original extent of Rome's sewer network remains one of its greatest unsolved puzzles. We know the monumental trunk lines, the ones that served the imperial heart. But what of the countless smaller capillaries that fed into them from the city's sprawling outskirts? From neighborhoods long since buried under millennia of silt and modern construction. Entire branches, perhaps miles of brick-lined channel, almost certainly lie forgotten, silently holding their shape deep beneath apartment blocks and plazas, waiting to be stumbled upon by a modern construction crew or a ground-penetrating radar scan. These lost tunnels are not just empty pipes. They are time capsules, sealed for centuries, potentially preserving artifacts and environmental data in their anaerobic mud that could rewrite our understanding of daily life in lesser-known districts of the ancient city. Then there are the rumors, the whispers that have drifted up from the dark for centuries, of spaces that defy the sewer's utilitarian purpose. Legends persist of hidden chambers, not for waste, but for storage or even clandestine meetings. Could a branch have been sealed off to create a vault? Might there be forgotten connections to the underground passages of private villas or the basement levels of temples? The logistical scale of the network makes the idea not entirely far-fetched. With maintenance crews able to walk through the main channels, and with the constant need for access shafts and sediment traps, the opportunities for creating sealed, side rooms would have been there. Whether they were used for the prosaic storage of tools and materials, or for something more secretive, is a mystery only physical discovery could solve. The promise of future excavation is therefore electric. Every new tunnel found is more than an engineering diagram, it is a social registry. The composition of the silt within a lost branch could tell us what a specific neighborhood ate, what they crafted, and what they threw away, with a neighborhood-by-neighborhood specificity we have never had. A sealed chamber, if one exists, could hold anything from discarded imperial statues to a cache of documents thought lost to history, preserved in the stable, damp environment. But the greatest revelation may be more subtle. By finally mapping the complete network, we could see the true priorities of Roman urban planning in stark relief. We could trace exactly where the civic investment stopped and the urban neglect began, drawing a literal underground map of social inequality. Each new discovery in the dark asks us to reconsider what we think we know about the light-filled world above. What forgotten turn in the darkness might lead us to a completely new understanding of Rome's heartbeat? The sun beats down on the cobbles of the Roman Forum, but your journey begins with a step into shadow. A heavy iron grate is lifted by silent attendants, revealing a stone staircase that spirals down into cool, damp air. The roar of the city above, the cries of merchants, the clatter of carts, the murmur of 1,000 conversations fades with each step, replaced by a new, more primal sound. It starts as a whisper, then grows to a low, resonant rush, the sound of a river confined by stone. This is the threshold of another world. The air changes, thick with the scent of wet earth and mineral damp. A clean, cold smell that carries a faint, organic tang. Not yet the foulness you might expect. Torchlight, now your only sun, flickers against walls of honey-colored tufa blocks, each one fitted with a precision that denies the crushing weight of the city above. You are standing in the anteroom of the Cloaca Maxima, and the flowing darkness ahead is not a void, but a destination. The channel itself opens before you, a staggering artificial canyon. The arched ceiling, curved like the inside of a giant barrel, soars high enough that you could not touch it even with a raised spear. The walls stretch wide. Perhaps 3 men could walk abreast without brushing the stone. But the true presence is the water. A stream, perhaps knee-deep, moves with a steady, purposeful energy down the center of the channel. It is not clear, but a milky gray-green, reflecting the torchlight in oily ripples. This is the lifeblood of the system, a blend of fresh aqueduct water, rain runoff from 100 streets, and the outflow from public fountains and baths. It flows with a constant, gurgling murmur, a sound that fills the entire tunnel, making conversation a raised voice affair. You walk on raised footpaths, narrow ledges of stone built into the walls on either side of the central stream, your boots scraping on grit. The air is cooler here, perpetually autumn, and it moves with the water, a faint, damp breeze flowing toward the distant Tiber. As you move deeper, the tunnel speaks. The sound of your small party is swallowed and echoed, footsteps bouncing ahead into the blackness, but other sounds intrude. A sudden, louder splash echoes from a side passage, the discharge from a public latrine somewhere directly above, a reminder of the living city overhead. Further on, you pass beneath a grated opening in the ceiling, a shaft of dusty daylight piercing the gloom. For a moment, you hear the distinct clatter of hooves on cobblestones and a fragment of shouted Latin. A surreal snapshot of the world you left behind, now 30 feet above your head. The light illuminates the water below, and you see things carried along in the current. A broken piece of pottery spins lazily. A bundle of straw, likely from a stable, bobs and turns. A discarded chicken bone, stripped clean, races past. This is not a river of pure filth, but a working current, carrying the small, accidental debris of 1 million daily lives. The engineering reveals itself in the details. Your torchlight glints off the walls, not off rough stone, but off a smooth, glassy sheen. This is the opus cementitium, the Roman concrete lining, applied like a seamless, waterproof skin over the tufa blocks. In places, you can see where maintenance crews have patched a crack. The newer concrete a slightly different shade. The slope beneath your feet is relentless. You do not feel you are walking downhill, but if you spill a drop of water from your flask, it will immediately trickle forward and join the stream, pulled by the same invisible hand that guides the entire flow. The Romans carved a mountain's worth of stone to create this perfect, gentle tilt, and walking it, you feel the genius of its persuasion. The water is not rushing. It is being persuaded, mile after mile, to leave the city. Then the darkness ahead begins to lighten, not with torchlight, but with a pale grey glow. The sound of the flowing water grows louder, merging with a new, deeper roar. The air freshens, carrying the smell of a large, open river. You round a final, gentle curve, and the tunnel ends. Before you is a great stone arch, the mouth of the Cloaca Maxima, framing a breathtaking view. The Tiber River flows past, broad and powerful, its brown waters churning. Your channel's stream pours out in a constant, smooth waterfall, joining the greater current. You stand in the threshold, half in the engineered darkness, half in the natural light, watching 2,000 years of relentless flow meeting the eternal river. The city's hidden heartbeat is exposed here, a silent, monumental confession to the water. You have walked from the sacred center of an empire to its secret, functional edge, and the journey changes your understanding of both. What must it have felt like to be one of the few who ever saw this view? To stand at the mouth of the world's greatest secret and watch it spill into the open day. That view from the sewer's mouth is a powerful place to stand, both literally and in our story. From that vantage point, we can trace the entire extraordinary arc of the Cloaca Maxima. It began as a king's desperate gamble, a colossal ditch carved to drain a pestilent swamp. That act of sheer will created the very ground upon which the Roman Forum, and thus the empire's heart, would be built. It was a tool of creation before it was ever a tool of cleanliness. Over centuries, Roman ambition transformed that ditch into a subterranean fortress, a monument to gravity and concrete. It became the central artery of a hidden circulatory system that reached into bathhouses, latrines, and streets, enabling a city of unprecedented scale to function. It was managed by a respected official, maintained by crews braving deadly darkness, and celebrated as a wonder equal to the aqueducts. Yet this same system also laid bare the empire's flaws, its social inequalities, and its tragic ignorance of the ecological and health costs it pushed downstream. It inspired fear and legend in the Middle Ages, humbled Renaissance engineers, and provided the literal blueprint for saving modern cities from plague. The Cloaca Maxima is not a single story, but a layered narrative of dirt and divinity, of brilliance and brutality. It is a testament to the Roman genius for solving massive, practical problems with monumental, lasting solutions. But more than that, it is a mirror. It reflects a civilization capable of staggering foresight and profound blindness, of building for eternity while often overlooking the cost paid in the present. Its stones tell us that true advancement is never a straight line, but a complex negotiation between ambition and consequence, between the glory we build in the light and the essential, unglamorous work we do in the dark. It challenges us to look at our own cities, our own infrastructure, and ask what we are building now that will whisper our priorities to the future. What ancient engineering marvel leaves you most in awe of the past's ingenuity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed unraveling this mystery of stone and water, subscribe to keep exploring the hidden stories that shaped our world.